Hi everyone, I'm Amanda, and today I'm going to talk a little bit about open source. So first of all, I would like to introduce myself a little bit. So I'm both a product and an engineering manager at Tinta Software, a software boutique that works mainly with US clients. So we work mainly with like Python and JavaScript, mainly Django to be honest. And I have 8 years of experience in the tech industry. Some of that was as a developer. I have previously been a speaker at other Python conferences like Django Cons and as well Python Brazil. And I have a sorry, something came up here. I have a soft spot for Django. Finally, I'm always hungry. So, all right. Before we get into the fun stuff, I just wanted to give some context on why I decided to talk about this. And for several years, even though I've always been a part of the open source community, and communities like this one, and have given talks on several of them. I have come into contact with great people within the community, but I just couldn't shake one thought out of my head, and that whatever I put out there in terms of code, people would forever judge me for it. And this is something that put me off contributing for several years. Like I've been working in tech since 2017, worked with Python and JavaScript professionally for around 5 of those years. And the first time I ever contributed to big deal open source was in 2025. And of course, like I had contributed to smaller open source projects before, but nothing that had like dozens or hundreds or even thousands of contributors working on it. So this talk goes to people in similar situations. Like it doesn't matter if you have several years of experience or if you're just starting out, open source has a spot saved up for you. And there's a second motivation behind the making of this talk, and it's why it's important for communities to care about the sustainability of open source. And this is what I wanted to quickly cover to ensure everybody's on the same page. So there's research about how much the open source resource is worth, and it was estimated at almost $9 trillion. So that's a lot of money. And it is known that around 90% of companies use this type of resource. Like this is a lot of businesses we're talking about that are depending on technology that's freely available out there. You can check out the sources for these numbers there. However, if you look at the numbers of how much is invested back into open source, you might be surprised. When we talk about personal contributions, a Stack Overflow research indicated that only 1 in 4 people who code professionally actually spends time outside work contributing to open source. As for companies, it's estimated that they only contribute around $7.7 billion annually to open source, and most of that is through employee labor. So they basically allow their employees to work on open source during work hours. If you consider the importance, of open source in the global economy, this information is quite shocking, at least it was for me. And we should be concerned about open source and its maintenance and longevity. There are a lot of risks bound to the fact that open source is mainly run by volunteers. Of course, there are very popular open source projects with organizations backing them up, be it public or private. And there are also quite a lot that don't have this type of support though. When we analyze the scenario, we see that there are instances where maintainers can get burnt out and give up on projects. The resources that are usually available for smaller projects are fewer. And of course, production projects that are using that resource may not benefit from things like SLAs for resolving high severity issues. I guess I made my point on the relevance of keeping open source going. So let's go back to some of the reasons why some of you may be cautious of starting your contribution journeys. The first one is the knowledge barrier. Like gathering context about a new code base can be challenging. And the level of documentation available in open source projects varies dramatically. Like it can be difficult to break the knowledge barrier at first, especially if you're not super experienced. However, you will find that there are resources available to help you better understand code bases. And later on in the talk, we're going to cover some strategies to do just that. The second one is imposter syndrome. I guess this was trendy a couple of years ago, but it reflects a phenomenon that most people have lived throughout their careers, that they're not good enough or that they will fail. And for most humans, it's pretty much guaranteed that we will feel insecure at some point in our lives. But this is something that we cannot let take control of our decisions. Like if you're giving up on something that you really want before even trying, Try to pause, reflect, and give it a chance, because you'll see that at the end of the day, most of it is going to be in your own head. And finally, fear of external judgment is totally natural, and it's a fact that there are some humans out there that can be, not so nice about others. But the open source community, and especially Python's open source community in general, is extremely welcoming with its contributors. I've never met anybody within these years of interacting with the community that was hostile or that looked down on others or that gave any reasons not to trust that they would be kind in their interactions, especially when we consider that open source is mainly run by unpaid volunteers. Now that I think I sold my point on why these common fears should be put aside so that you can focus on the more practical things, I would like to talk a little bit about how to start your contribution journey. There are several ways to start contributing. There's no need for us to bureaucratize things too much, nor is there a right way to start. However, there are some paths that you can take to make things easier if you're just starting, or if you're more of a self-taught person, you can go through other routes. The first path that I want to call out is through mentorship programs, and I guess the most famous one is Google Summer of Code, which is basically an online program that focuses on bringing more people into open source development. And the way that the program is structured is through a 12-week period in which people can get mentored to work on open source projects. There are a multitude of organizations that sign up to have their projects worked on through this program, so there's no shortage of options for you to choose, different languages for you to start your contribution journey with. To participate, you basically must apply through their website when there's an open cohort and go through the selection process. It's also only open to university students or recent college grads. And the other one that I wanted to talk about was Django Space, which is an open to all program that offers to mentor people throughout an 8-week period in which folks are divided into teams that contribute to 3 different Django projects: Django itself, Django CMS, as well as Django Debug Toolbar. I've been a part of this program myself and can say that it's very rewarding and structured. And it also works through cohorts, and there's also a selection process for participating. But not only do you get to contribute to major open source projects, but you also get access to an awesome community, exclusive talks and workshops, and so on. In fact, Django Space should have a session coming up soon, so stay tuned to their socials to know more about that. And there are a lot of open source mentorship programs that I could cover here, but we could spend a whole day covering all of them, and I only have 30 minutes. So here's a more comprehensive list that contains several alternatives to the programs mentioned above. And while you guys take a picture, I'm going to drink some water. All right, cool. So while there are mentorship programs for people who appreciate more structure, I don't think they're actually the most popular path. Open source is very open. So you can always open GitHub and find an interesting project to work on. But choosing can be at times harder than just being assigned to work on something. I know that. But there are so many possibilities there, right? Like how easy to learn is this code base? How impactful is this project? Will I like working on this type of feature that they have an open issue about? And I guess my first tip here is try not to get lost in the ocean of choices. Like just pick a repo, have a go at it, try it for an amount of time, and if it's not a fit, just try again. Like it can be jarring to choose a way forward, but you shouldn't spend too much time on it exactly because of that. If you also have professional experience as a developer, I'm pretty sure that you've used an open source tool at some point in your career. And this can be a great way to start as well. Like try to remember some of the tools that you used and explore them. Like this is especially interesting because if you've had a good chunk of experience with the tool, you're gonna be better at developing for it because as an experienced user, you can skip through the part of getting to know the tool before contributing to it. There's this term in the industry called dogfooding, right? Which is basically using the product you develop. And this is super important, not only to get a good hang of what you contribute to, but also to put yourself in user shoes so you make sensible choices about features and usability. you're inevitably going to have to dog food in open source. So if you're already familiar with the tool, that skips some steps. After choosing the repo that you want to contribute to, there are some important steps that you need to take beyond reading the code. So first, if there are any chat communities, try to join them. It's a good idea to do that because sometimes it's the only way that you're gonna get your questions answered and receive feedback about your work. So Discord is usually the most popular one for that. And after you've done these initial steps, we can dive into more practical tips on contributing. All right, so the first one is about navigating repositories, which is like one of the first things that you're gonna do. And this is something that can be challenging if you've never done it before. There are things to be considered there, like whether the repo is still active or not, the amount of issues, if the maintainers are easily reachable. Apart from that, there's the whole part about understanding the code itself. And there's huge buzz around vibe coding right now. I've vibe coded systems myself. It's very fast. You get to review work instead of writing. And there's a lot of time that can be saved, especially in fairly manual and toily tasks. But like if you're very early in your contribution journey, or if you're more on the junior side, AI can get in your way at times. So I recommend using it with moderation so you can grasp the basics and not just become an AI operator. But one great use of AI that I always use it for is for explaining code bases, behaviors and so on. My tool of choice is Cursor, but I know that Copilot, which is free for students, for example, also does this. Basically, you can select pieces of the code, files, etc. Pass the whole context to the code base, and the AI will become a great colleague to you. It will explain you things. This is especially helpful in an open source context because the code base is often quite old, and there's a lot to catch up on. All right, so now that you somewhat understand the code base, it's now time to find good issues to start contributing. Most repos will track their issues in the Issues tab. However, there are instances where the issues are tracked elsewhere. For example, like Django is like that. Find where the issues are tracked and try to identify if there are any labeling systems available. It's common that repo maintainers use labels to categorize their issues, like good first issue, easy pickings, needs design decision, bug, and so on. Of course, the most obvious tip that I could give you would be to start with good first issue or easy pickings. But most of the time, there aren't many, and the ones that exist are already assigned to somebody. And as Carlton Gibson said in his 2019 PyCon Europe talk about contributing to Django, these things aren't binary. It's not like there are only hard or easy tickets. We will find that if we look carefully, there are quite a few that are quite in between, and that will require some thought and dedication, but that are achievable. There's one more consideration that I'd like to point out, and I think one of the best ways to start contributing, be it for open source or closed source, is starting with bug fixes, because you can really understand a code base through that. This is not a rule, but a lot of the projects will have templates for bug reporting that will contain useful information about the issue that needs to be resolved. A lot of them will contain things like expected behavior, actual behavior, screenshots, environment the user was when the error occurred. Anyway, lots of context for you to get started on a resolution. And bug fixes allow you to deeply understand the behavior of a feature and adjacent parts of the system before you dive into more complex problems. Of course, there will be weirdly complex bugs too, but you will find that in healthy code bases, they won't be the majority. So before even trying to solve any issues, one needs to be mindful of understanding the contribution rules for the projects that they're trying to work on. Some projects will be very explicit about that with contributing files, documentation for contributors, coding guidelines and styles, PR templates, etc. Others won't be so obvious about that. In any case, always start out by looking for these sorts of rules before actually opening any PRs and asking people to review them. If this isn't documented, try to reach out for the community, ask questions. These Discord spaces often have channels dedicated to answering questions. So it should be fairly easy to get clarity on project standards in most cases. In case the project does not have a standard, you can still keep your work organized by yourself. And there are some general guidelines you can follow, but of course they will vary greatly from case to case. So instead of dictating comprehensive rules, I'll try to bring light to what I like to use personally. So while there are repos that don't require code changes to necessarily contain tests, I think that every developer should be concerned about releasing untested code anywhere. And for that reason, I'm a great advocate for test-driven development. In case you guys don't know, test-driven development is a practice in which you write automated tests before implementing the code. So first, your tests are going to fail, and you'll keep running them while you implement the code until all of them pass. And this practice is great because it forces you to think about edge cases before you even start implementing your code. And then at the end, you have really good coverage for it. If you're starting out with bugs, for example, TDD can be a great ally in validating that the issue is in fact happening, and then also validating that your solution has actually worked, right, and has resolved the issue. So at the end of the day, you're going to be increasing the test coverage, or at least not decreasing it. So it's a good practice all around. When creating branches, it's important to do them in an organized way, and this will vary greatly depending on the project. Some of them will require you to use, the issue ID prefixing the branch. Others will use git flow or something else. Like, I recommend you look up different naming strategies and conventions and stick to one if there aren't any defined. But later on in a project, this sort of standardization helps folks better understand what your code additions are about. And if the whole team decides on a convention, there are also automations that can be gained from it too. Moving on to committing, it's super important to adhere to good practices when issuing commits in a repo. And if used well, commits tell a story of the changes that occurred and can be used to go back in time to a point where the code was behaving in a certain way. And that's why direct and explicit commit messages are crucial, especially in open source projects, like considering that several different people are going to work on them over the years. I'm sure that many of you already know the good practices, like ensuring that commits reflect individual changes, for example. But there are other conventions you can explore to organize your commits through. One of them is actually called conventional commits and advocates for prefixing commit messages with what they are about, like feature, chore, fix, and so on. Another very similar pattern is the semantic commit messages. If I'm not mistaken, that's from GitHub. And if you're a serial committer like me, like seriously, I commit a lot due to the fear of not saving partial work, you may end up with a long commit history for that branch. And in that case, consider using something like Git Squash so that you don't pollute the commit history for the repo and your code is more easily reversible. So code comments. I personally love when I go read code and find useful comments there. This one is a sensitive issue. There are people who think code should be so simple that you don't need any comments to understand it. And yes, I get that point. But in real life, there are times where we cannot run away from inherent complexity. And I'm making a clear distinction here between accidental and an inherent complexity. So code comments can be useful to readers when they help understand chains of behaviors, edge cases, and overall context. So when I'm developing for open source, I try to use them to close understanding gaps in my code. Of course, use it with parsimony. A lot of comments in the code will just pollute it. And when using Python, try to make use of doc strings to explain what your functions and modules do, because there are tons of benefits that come from them, like easily generating API docs, for example. So documentation. Documenting your code is also important, for end users. Documenting your code is important for developers who are going to build on top of it. But documenting behaviors is just as important to guarantee that end users are well informed about what your code does. I think that no significant PR should be merged without updates to the project's docs. And here's where AI can be a great helper too. Asking an AI agent to look at the current docs, look at your code changes, and then generate new or updated docs based on that is super quick. You just need to make sure to review it so you don't end up merging incorrect content. If you prefer doing it the classic way, I recommend you get acquainted with the project's docs to understand structure, writing style, where your feature fits test. And if you're unsure, you can always ask maintainers where to include your docs. So release notes. Some repos ask that contributors also include their changes in the next version's release notes, so it's important to keep an eye out for that. Some repos have this automated, so if that's the case for the repo that you're contributing, make sure to know that. If they are manual, you'll probably be asked to write a short sentence explaining your change and indicating if it's just a minor change, if it's a fix, a breaking change, and so on. So always check with maintainers before opening your PR. And speaking of checking with maintainers, there's certain etiquette that you should follow when communicating with them. Even if you see there's like a main maintainer, try not to overload them with questions or just rely on them. Unless they tell you it's okay, it's good to refrain from messaging them directly about project concerns and just bugging them out. This is not a written rule, but it's good practice because if you direct your communications to the public channel, the chances of you getting your questions answered is way higher, and the maintainers won't be so overwhelmed. Of course, if you want, you can set very clear expectations with them, like asking them how they prefer to communicate up front, for example. But if you don't want to validate these things before that, it's good to follow this common sense advice. And when writing questions, asking for PR reviews, and so on, it's also good practice to try and include as much context as you can in your message, and even include a short summary of it first so people quickly get what you mean. This is a skill that may need to be developed for some, and whenever one of the people that I lead have difficulty with the sort of contextual and objective communication, I usually direct them to use AI nowadays, like ChatGPT. Here's a good starter prompt to get as much context into your message as possible. So you're an expert in technical writing. I'm trying to write a message about a question I have about this open source project I'm contributing to. Here's a link to its repo. I want to convey my questions to the maintainers in a clear, concise way at the same time that I want it to have enough context so that the communication happens with the least back and forth possible. I want this question to contain a short, max 2-sentence summary up front, and then more context in the text body. Ask me whatever questions you need about my question and in context in order to produce this message. And this is a prompt that you can modify however you like, but the gist of it is that it'll basically ask you questions until it has enough information to write the message for you. And after doing everything right and opening your PR, be prepared to wait. Open source can be slow. Most folks are doing it for free, and it's hard to balance everything. We have families, work, friends, and several other concerns to attend to. And I guess that excitement can make us a little unaware of that when we start. So adjusting expectations is essential here. Don't think that folks are necessarily going to review your work within the first day or two. Instead, prepare yourself for things like weekly feedback before pinging people for reviews. It can be a little discouraging when you're really excited about getting going and merging your work, but instead try to focus on other things and just enjoy the process. And finally, enjoy the feeling. Contributing to open source is extremely fulfilling. The community feeling you get, the people you meet, the feeling of working on something bigger that helps others is quite rewarding. And if you're interested in starting in open source and would like some guidance, please feel free to talk to me in the hallways. I know some people who could use help. And Django Not Space actually has openings for volunteers, for people who are more experienced and would like to guide people that are wanting to get into open source. So feel free to sign up and volunteer as an organizer or program mentor or even open source mentor. And also feel free to talk to me in the hallways about this opportunity or send them an email at this email there. And if you'd like to go your own way, here are some of the references that helped me build this presentation. Thank you.